But we have a very talented group of people, and you do too, and I know they work together very well. I look forward to that.
U.S. President Donald Trump seemed pretty positive on Monday morning about the G7 summit and his meeting with Prime Minister Mark Carney.
He did, yeah, but then he left early.
President, any statement on why you're leaving the G7 early for Washington?
Well, I have to be back. Very important. I want to just thank our great host.
That was Trump responding to reporters during the traditional taking of what's called the family photo of G7 leaders Monday night, confirming the news that he was not, in fact, going to stay for the second day of the summit. But was that good news or bad news for what the other G7 leaders had to get done? Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney certainly made the pitch for how important it was to have everyone around the table.
And there is a great amount of direct dialogue and discussion, very frank exchanges, very strategic exchanges, differences of opinion on a number of issues, but from an effort to find common solutions to some of these problems. The fact that at a time when multilateralism is under great strain, and I'm absolutely clear it is, that we got together, we agreed on a number of areas, that's important and that's valuable.
I'm Catherine Cullen, host of CBC's The House.
I'm Daniel Thibeault, host of Radio-Canada's political show Les Coulisses du Pouvoir, and today I'm covering the G7 meeting from Banff.
And I'm Jason Markusoff, producer and writer for CBC in Calgary.
And together, we are House Party, a weekly podcast diving into the big burning questions driving this new government. And this week, we're asking, did Canada get ahead when Trump went home early from the G7? Okay, guys, so this is the question. Trump leaves, the guest of honor? Was Trump the guest of honor? I don't know. He was certainly the one everyone was looking at. He didn't ghost the party, but he certainly did leave early. Good thing or bad thing, Dan?
It's probably not a bad thing. I remember covering the last G7 in Canada. It was in Charlevoix, and Trump was there and stayed all the way until the end of the meeting, and then imploded when he was on board Air Force One, leaving the summit on his way to Singapore, if I'm not mistaken, sending all those tweets and all those nasty comments directed towards Justin Trudeau back then. But leaving early in a orderly fashion, not throwing any tantrum, not insulting anyone on the way out, was probably the best way you could hope for that to go. And then the second day of meeting went fairly well, just because you didn't have to manage any kind of worries or expectation towards Trump's side. So if you want to look at the positive side, I guess it was probably not a bad thing.
You say positive side, I say perhaps low bar, not insulting anyone on the way out. What do you think, Jason?
Well, I mean, you can talk about how on that second day they can do a whole bunch of things, the G6 minus one, but not have be able to conclude that the heft of the G7 is behind you. But let's face it, the big deal with meetings, with anything with Trump, where other leaders interact, is we don't want anything disastrous to happen. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure all the Sherpas and aides and everything, and probably even the leaders themselves, are on tenterhooks, worrying he's going to do something wild, like he did in Charlevoix, like he did with the South African president who was there on the second day, and the Ukrainian president who was there on the second day, Zelensky, and a no disaster first day. Quit while you're ahead. I don't know.
I'm kind of torn about this one because on the one hand, I do see how there can be meaningful conversations without, the proverbial elephant in the room. But at the same time, you guys both said it. Like, if the whole point of the thing, and it's not just you, lots of other international affairs experts, not just the cast of House Party, have said the point here is no big blow-ups. Like, again, is the bar so low? And does his willingness to just leave make this meeting like kind of cheapen it? Is it on the way out?
It does feel that way. It does feel like the bar is very low. At the same time, I'm sure there was disappointment from some people, and particularly the guest on day 2. Some of them probably were hoping to have a couple of minutes with Trump to talk about their issue of concern. I'm thinking about Claudia Sheinbaum from Mexico, who probably wanted to chat about tariffs with Trump, or Zelensky, who's looking for a weapon system that he badly needs, that he needs to get from the U.S. Would have been nice for him to have a quick chat with President Trump on the way in or on the way out. And so people like that who came specifically in Alberta on the invitation of Mark Carney to participate to the G7 probably came with the thought that they would have a chance to have a quick word with Trump, and that didn't materialize.
Yeah, I think for those other leaders, better to be on tenterhooks and get a meeting and get something to say than nothing at all.
Okay, Dan, you're there. What was it like when everyone found out that Trump was cutting out early?
So for people home who have never covered something like that, and probably a lot of our listeners...
normal people, yeah.
normal people. There's a very small group of reporters that are in Kananaskis. It's a very limited group of people. We are stuck in Banff. Stuck. It's not bad. Like
yeah, woe is you.
Yeah, I know. Someone has to do it. But our people in Kananaskis found out when the word started to go around. And so it was a bit of a surprise, I do have to say, because everything during the day and the way the discussions were going, and at that point we were talking a lot about negotiation between Canada and the U.S. To find a way to lift the tariffs, and it seemed like it was going fairly well, and it seemed like something was advancing, and there was no blowout during the day, and so everyone thought, all right, it's going to be a nice G7. And then that news. So, bit of a shock, bit of a surprise. At the same time, I think some of my colleagues may have had a bit of a, okay, so tomorrow's going to be a little easier. But you roll with the punches, right? So it happened. We fit that into our report and moved on this morning.
I just want to say, we should note, we are doing this, and bless Jason, during the Oilers game. We're actually taping this just after Mark Carney's news conference wrap. So it's important to know that, because we still don't actually perhaps know all the consequences of this. And, is Trump still going to Trump? I think we said that on the show 2 weeks ago, and he immediately trumped. So I think we should just note we don't actually know where this story ends right now, and it could change dramatically even in the next few minutes.
And I personally would have had no clue what happened in the first period of the game were it not for our darn Prime Minister having to reference the score.
Spoiler alert.
I know that last I heard, it's 1-0 for the Panthers.
It's 2-0 now. It's the first period just ended. Sorry, man. It's two more periods.
You're gonna pooch my game here. Not the hockey game. I mean my pod game.
Which is a sadder
They're
party.
gonna make a huge comeback. That's gonna be an amazing
yes.
finish, I'm sure.
Yes.
Expect the unexpected. Yeah.
I imagine myself so much happier when this podcast, by the time this podcast airs. Yes.
Okay, so we know how the bad news is affecting the podcast, which is not great. Let's talk about how Trump leaving affects things at the G7. What does it mean? He was there for the whole first day. He did the big dinner and everything too. And I know people who are invested in Canada chairing this, Canadian officials would suggest, listen, he was there for the vast majority of the thing. He really only missed one major session. But still, what does it mean when you take Donald Trump out of the equation?
Part of it is that it means that the rest of the industrialized leaders can have a fairly standard conversation. Give you an example. The 7 of them had to come up with a bunch of small communiques. Normally they do this big one. This year they did a whole bunch of small, minor statements. One was called the Kananaskis Wildfire Protocol, Kananaskis Wildfire Agreement. And they don't talk about climate change as the cause or anything to do with wildfires. And I went back and looked at last year's communique, which was much, much longer, much, much more extensive, and it mentions climate 55 times. So that second day, I mean, obviously I'm not in that room, but you can have a conversation among industrialized, democratic, rule of law believing leaders about various issues like Russia's aggression, like climate change, like AI, without the great disruptor in the room potentially derailing any of those conversations or being very upset that the rest of you are talking about climate change because he doesn't really believe in it.
But then it leads to some disappointing results, those communiques, none of them on Ukraine, which when Zelensky comes to the meeting sounds like a weird thing to do, right? You should have something in Ukraine. It might have been something that could have been done if Trump had stayed for the extra day. Maybe they would have been able to hammer something into him. Not sure. But they didn't get a chance to try, and so we ended up with nothing on that.
I don't know if we want to say major disappointment. I mean, shall we go through the list of major G7 communique conclusions in world history? I mean, there are probably some people from the G7 study group who are like, well, there's this one and this one and this one, but for 99.8% of the population, these come and go. They discuss big things, but these communiques, for instance, this time they had a critical minerals communique, which was building on the great success, they said, of the 5-point action plan from 2023's G7 meeting, which we all, of course, remember
that was a
so
classic.
vividly.
And how
it's
a great one.
Think of all the critical minerals we've extracted since then, right? But it's
all about the magnets.
We attend these things, we watch these things, and I'm not saying that they're not important. I think it's important to get major leaders coming together to talk. But, we will sometimes wind up over-scrutinizing the absence or lack or what is said in some of these communiques, where we know, without having to ask Mark Carney, without having to read a communique, where every leader but Trump stands on Ukraine. And we know where he stands on Ukraine, whether there's a communique getting him on the same page or not.
I did want to talk a little bit about this question of what happens when he's in the room versus not in the room, because I'm kind of fence sitting this week on our thesis statement. What does it mean when he's not around, good or bad? I laughed reading the New York Times. Clearly, big nerd here, whatever. That they were talking about the meeting between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump, right? And the UK and the US have a deal. And there was this, you talk about super awkward photo ops. They hold up the piece of paper. Trump drops the papers. Starmer's rustling through the papers, trying to hand them back to Trump. And then at one point, Trump says, "So we have our trade agreement with the European Union." You will all note that the United Kingdom is not the European Union. There was that whole Brexit thing. They're kind of the opposite in some ways now. And the New York Times writes, Mr. Starmer blinked and kept his silence. He also goes on to say that Britain will not face further tariffs because I like them. That's their ultimate protection. And why do I bring this stuff up? I think... we keep talking about Charlevoix. That's the last time Canada hosted this group of 7 leaders. There's this classic photo that people may have seen. Angela Merkel has sort of got her arms across the German chancellor at the time. You can see the whole room is ticked off at Trump, and you can kind of feel, just looking at the picture, the tension that must have been in that room. Think about the way the world leaders are dealing with him now. It's so different. There is this kind of you could call it sycophantic. I know Emmanuel Macron from France was sort of pushing back against him a bit again after Trump left. Trump tweeted some not nice things about how Macron's always wrong, and Macron suggested, Trump was a hypocrite, but in a slightly more polite way. But fundamentally, they're trying to suck up to him so he doesn't blow up both their economies and just this meeting, knock everything so wildly off course. And also, the New York Times piece noted, Starmer would have liked to have lobbied Trump a little bit further on Ukraine. And this is where I think we do get away from all this stuff of what even is the G7? Who cares about the difference between the chair's statement and the joint statement and, the special declaration? What it comes down to are these conversations where if you can convince an important power, if you can convince everyone to get on side and do more on this crucial issue, and perhaps Trump isn't movable, perhaps that's a delusion, but I think there is there may be advantage, but there's lost opportunity there too.
There might be, but at the same time, what do you do? How do you how do you deal with this guy? How do you deal with the unpredictable side? I was looking at the photo op, the moment where the cameras are in the room when both Trump and Carney are about to sit down for their bilateral meeting, and the body language is amazing. Trump goes on and he's ranting about that it should be a G8 and Russia should be back in, and it was Justin Trudeau's fault because he kicked him out.
It hurt Putin's feelings or something that he was kicked out after he invaded Crimea. Anyway.
And it was Justin Trudeau's fault before he was Prime Minister, because Harper was Prime Minister at that point.
It was Harper, exactly. And all that time, Carney was just standing right there, not saying much, not moving much. He winked at someone in the room at some point during that rant, and I've been racking my brain for the past 2 days trying to figure out what he meant by that little blink. Anyway, at some point, he just nicely turned to him and said, I'm going to take my privilege of host and put an end to that, and he kicked everyone out of the room. But the prudence that he was using around him to not make him go any further or make him mad or make him say something even more outrageous was something that I think if we could have been in every room when someone was with him, any world leader probably behaved the exact same way because that's what you have in front of you. That's what you're trying to avoid.
If we think back to Charlevoix, like what was the major offensive for Mark that Justin Trudeau talked about to make Trump furious and rip up the communique afterwards? He was just saying we might have to retaliate on the first administration's imposition of steel and aluminum tariffs. That's all he said. And then Trump went, flew off the handle on it, as he does on social media.
Him a hypocrite.
And one of his aides, said there's the place in hell for people who like Trudeau. So I mean, I am sure as Carney winks, there was some temptation to, actually, Donald Trump. But what merit is there in that? What is to be gained? Look, this question that you asked, Catherine, did Canada get ahead when Trump left early? It would be a substantially different answer if the bilateral meeting, Trump and Carney directly, was supposed to be on the second day. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then we'd have said that was bad. This was a bad thing. But Carney got a meeting with Trump, a very cordial meeting, the second of hopefully, I guess many, unless you like huge drama. And we also got this, soft agreement that to have some kind of trade deal or some trade agreement eye to eye within 30 days, which was more than I think they were setting expectations for. They were tamping down the expectations there would be a deal right away. If you're a steel producer, relief in 30 days is a lot better sounding than relief when Trump gets to it.
I think there's a lot to say about this 30-day deadline, and Dan, you're there. You'd have the best sense of it. Like, how significant is this?
I think it's significant on two levels. The Canadian delegation had set up expectations pretty high on the trade front, on the tariff front, and I've talked to a lot of people leading to the meeting here, to the G7, who said to me, "There's a window. There's something that can be achieved because they're going to be in the same room. They're going to sit down. They're going to discuss." And I think the few contentious issue might be resolved by that meeting. And it didn't happen. And then the question becomes, how long do we have to wait before we get somewhere? And how long do we wait before we retaliate? Because we talked about tariffs on steel and aluminum. I'd like to remind people that there was an increase on those tariffs a couple of weeks ago. And Canada said, we're not going to go ahead with retaliation because our discussion's going very well right now, and we wouldn't want to muddle that. Well, at some point, we're going to have to retaliate if we don't get a deal. And so the 30-day is works on two folds. It puts some pressure on the U.S., and that's what we were told today. It will probably force a conversation about some of the issue that seem to have been put on the table by Canada, and they're not getting an answer back from the U.S. And it also tells Canadians, well, you know what? If we don't get something in 30 days, this is where we turn the page and move to the next chapter.
I think it's key for people to understand, and you pointed to it there. It's not a deal. It is not a deal at all. I mean, Mark Carney said a deadline focuses the mind, and it for both sides, I think they're hoping that they can push Trump and the Americans into a place that they are almost willing to go. But also, as you said, Dan, like in a way, too, I think they're protecting themselves, because if Mark Carney had walked out of this and it was like, well, things are feeling good and we're talking and we're still working, then he would be hammered for weeks with questions about what are you doing on steel and aluminum? Hey, you were Mr. Elbows Up, aren't you elbows down now, which is something that Conservatives have really already been seizing on. So this 30 days, he's drawn his own line in the sand, and he can say, well, when that's up, then we're going to do what we have to do. Hoping to push the Americans, but I think it does, in theory, offer him some kind of political cover as well.
So you're kind of saying that it sets the clock ticking for U.S., but for Carney, it kind of buys time?
Ooh.
A little bit of both. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe, but
Yeah,
I think
to a
it's
degree.
like that. It buys time, but it is a countdown. Everyone
Yeah.
is feeling the pressure here, and the sense I get is that there isn't certainty that this is going to work out the way that anybody wants it to. We could just be with nothing in our hands in 30 days.
It shields him from the attacks for the next 30 days, I guess. And so, because he can always say, we're negotiating. We told you we're negotiating. And then the deadline is, I guess, July the 16th, 30 days. So until then, it limits the number of questions he needs to answer. And then after that, well, he can move on.
Speaking of testy relationships, he met Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, there, which a lot of people here in Calgary, there were quite a few people protesting the very existence of that meeting, given the accusations by Canada that the Indian government had some role in the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. So there were people who didn't want this to happen, but it went ahead. Dan, you were adjacent to Kananaskis when that happened.
Yeah. It's it really feels like when I looked at the invitation and I looked at body language in the room during the when the cameras were in the room and the two men shook hands, it really felt to me like it was Mark Carney, the banker, the economic, he's looking at it through a financial lens. This is the fifth biggest economy in the world. Can we really do without them? Is there any way we can work on our issue and at the same time trying to patch things up and see if there's something that we can do, and all that in a broader reflection of diversifying our trading partners. And so it felt like he was trying to strike a balance between, I get it, and it's bad what happened and it needs to be addressed, but at the same time, can we do that and maybe rekindle our relation? It's not going to go very far. They've agreed, it seems, to basically named High Commissioner back into each countries, which is a small step, but it's the beginning of something. It's also a bit of a gamble for him, I guess. If it doesn't go well, or if he doesn't get the settlement he needs on the other side for the accusation, the very grave accusation that were put out there by his predecessor, it may be seen as a bad idea in a few months.
I thought it was interesting. He was asked about this in the closing news conference, and he really tried to set the bar for himself and set the tone here. He was speaking again in this very positive way, and what you said there, Dan, about the economic relationship. I mean, he talked about how the fact that there are so many people-to-people ties, so many business ties, and those folks aren't being served by the existing relationship. But he said, this meeting that we had, it was a foundational meeting. He sort of suggested that it was something a bit lamentable about the fact that they had to have the kind of conversation. I thought there was a very diplomatic, very polite, sorry, I had to take the guy out to the shed and tell him what for. But in world leader terms, which was talked about the importance of the respect for our sovereignty. But again, when we really want to pierce through all this diplomatic language and say what we are talking about here, it is not just the killing of a Sikh activist who is a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil that has ties to the alleged ties to the Indian government and the previous government under Justin Trudeau was pretty clear that they had evidence that backed up those allegations. It is a bigger campaign, an ongoing campaign of using Indian consular services to spy on people in this country, extortion, all kinds of pressure, violence. And there's no indication that any of that has stopped. So Mark Carney's line seemed to be listen, we had a very nice chat. We talked about the importance of getting on the same page about basic stuff, law enforcement, respect for our sovereignty, and that has to happen before we can go to the next level. I think that sounds good, but I think we really need to see what happens. I mean, Narendra Modi is a powerful force in the world. Is he listening to Mark Carney? Are we going to see those campaigns of repression go away because of the conversation that happened here or not? And the stakes are really high. Like, I get that this is not something that's on everybody's radar, but I think it's a really fundamental question. And I think what it tells us about Mark Carney's values, it's a significant message, and I'm very interested to see where that is going to take us.
Yeah, I was kind of joking to Dan to not nerd out on the communiques. There was one little bit of political statecraft by Carney that got me teeing a bit, and I don't know if people noticed it. But in his one-on-one with Narendra Modi, the little pool spray they have, or little media gathering they have where they invite the cameras before they go in, he talked about what they were going to speak about. And one of the things he mentioned was transnational repression. A pretty anodyne but decent statement about transnational repression out of the G7. What is transnational repression? It's assassinating and harassing and targeting your own country's citizens on foreign soil. So, I don't know, that was like a little slight dig, and I don't know if Narendra Modi got it or appreciated it. I didn't notice anything in his eyes.
I didn't notice a reaction.
That he was. But in the dramatic statecraft of these meetings, to me that was a bit of a satisfying moment. Not that it's going to cause anything, not that it's going to change anything, not that we're suddenly going to see, Narendra Modi be humbled and stop what's alleged to be wide-scale, brutal transnational repression. But as so many of these things are, it was an interesting moment in the drama of a G7.
I saw that too, and I wondered if it was a message to Modi or a message to the people watching at home. Like, I saw the protest in Calgary this afternoon. I saw the reaction, and you probably did too. And so was that a bit of a message that he wanted to send back saying, I hear you, and I know this is a concern, and I have a thing with finance, but I also get that. Or maybe it was just something that he wanted to throw to Modi and say, there it is. It's still something that matters to us.
I think that is a significant and important point. Ever so slightly disappointed because I thought we were all going to giggle over how the Prime Minister says aluminium. But okay, yes, transnational repression. All right.
How do you pronounce
aluminium? Perhaps he spent a little bit too long in the UK using the British pronunciation.
Okay, so it's like aluminium in French.
Ça se peut.
Yeah.
Ça se peut. Maybe it's not a British thing. Maybe he just got a little Franco-Anglo.
French is not that good.
But when I'm wrapping my leftovers, I'm using aluminum foil. Like a good Canadian.
Aluminium foil.
Aluminum.
Aluminum.
Okay, guys, the funny thing is, those guys have to go do it all again next week because the NATO military alliance is meeting in Brussels. And so obviously there is a lot going on in the world in the interim, which is, again, a good note. We're timestamping this. We still don't know exactly what Trump's plans are for Iran, which was his stated reason for leaving the meeting early. But, there's certainly a related conversation that's going to happen next week. How is Trump going to handle it? How are the world leaders going to handle it? It's just going to be a bigger group of folks at NATO. So if nothing else, there's fodder for our next house party.
Teeth will be clenched.
Oh, and by the way, the score is still the same. So it hasn't moved. 2-0, 2-0.
Jason's teeth are clenched then. Okay, guys, listen, let's get Jason out of here so we can watch the rest of this game.
There's a seat at the bar waiting for me. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? I'm in Alberta right now. It feels like I'm going to go and find a TV somewhere and finish the game as well.
You guys are making me jealous. Okay, well, that is definitely it for House Party this week. Thanks to my co-hosts, Jason Markusoff, Daniel Thibeault, and thanks to our production team, Caitlin Crocker, Jennifer Chevalier, and Carla Hilton. We have just one more episode left of House Party next week. And to make sure you get it, follow us in the podcast feed for The House. That is my other show about politics. The House will be with you on Saturday, and House Party will be back next Wednesday with one more big, burning political question.